So if you were to take a fundamentalist, so I just want to be fair, if you were to take a fundamentalist view of the Old Testament, it'd be very easy to say all the Palestinians have to get out of Judea and Samaria, and everyone has to be put to the sword. That if you follow the book of Joshua, if you follow
as literally the policy of the current Israeli government. Yes.
You could definitely, Netanyahu did align himself with a very, very fanatical fundamentalist group of people to stay in power who seem to have not a whole lot of respect for the Palestinian villages that are there.
It's not even about it's against any Jew who disagrees.
Well, and a lot of Israelis would agree with you, right? I mean, Israel was in a low-key civil war before this happened.
Absolutely.
You had the labor and the Kud. You had Israelis are famous for debate. One of their strengths, I think, and the strengths of the Jews is that they sort of like always will push back on authority. They're gonna be like, hold on. They're not going to just take doctrine at face value. You've got a lot of Israelis who are very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. We can go on and on.
But let's go back to your point.
Let me go back to that point. So to say, love your enemy, turn the other cheek, which is what Christ preached, right? And love. And Paul, the apostle, talked about without love, Christianity is basically nothing. Do you see the same things in Islam? Or is Islam more about spreading the word through military conquest the way Muhammad did for a lot of his life?
First of all, Muhammad did not do that.
Okay, good. So, here we go.
But here's what happens, folks. Here's what happens is that you get this all the time where people are like, I'm going to take literally the best line from my scripture and compare it to the worst line from your scripture and say, see the difference? Scripture is just words on a page. That's all it is. It has no inherent meaning to it. Meaning comes solely from the encounter with Scripture. The same Hebrew Scripture, the Old Testament, that says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, also says, slay every idolater, man, woman, and children wherever you find them. What?
That is in the Old Testament.
Same Jesus,
several times.
Hold on. The same Jesus who said, turn the other cheek, also said, I have not come to bring peace. I've come to bring the sword. The same Quran that says, fight the unbeliever wherever you find them, also says, if you kill one human being, it is as though you have killed all of humanity. So this is the thing. Scripture, almost by definition, runs the entire gamut of like expressions and emotions and interpretations. All scriptures are replete with like contradictions and conflicts. And, one verse says peace and another verse says war, because almost by definition, again, Scripture is about the totality of the human experience. So it's bullshit to be like, yeah, but this Scripture has one loving verse and this Scripture has a war verse. So these two religions are different. Okay, compare shit to shit and love to love, and then we can talk about it. But even so, that's not even all that important. What I think is fascinating about this conversation is that we as human beings are fundamentally built to define ourselves in opposition to others. It's really hard on an individual level, on a ethnic level, on a national level, on a religious level. It's very hard to say what you are, to say who you are. It's the easiest thing in the world to say what you aren't, who you aren't. And the way that you define that is you find the worst in something else and say, that's not us. That's not us. It is not whataboutism, right? To say, yes, the actions of Hamas as a terror organization in slaughtering men, women, and children is horrific and needs to be condemned, full stop. There's nothing else there. The question then becomes, well, what do you want to do about it?
Right.
That's the issue. Like, well, okay, great. Yeah, we all agree it's awful. So what do you want to do about it? And right now, the policy of the Israeli government is retribution. And it has always been retribution. I mean, this is a government that supported Hamas, that funded Hamas, that helped build Hamas to what it is now, and did so openly, unapologetically, explicitly.
As a bulwark or as
a bulwark
to
against
Fatah.
Yeah. Exactly. Which, by the way, is also shit. Okay, no, I don't want anyone to think that I'm sitting here like,
right.
Fatah, shit. Yeah. But there's a difference, obviously, between Fatah and Hamas, and has done so. And then, I know a lot of Americans are confused when they see the internal, politics of Israel playing out right now, and that, if after 9/11, it doesn't matter if you were on the left or the right or whatever, we were all like Bush, rah, rah, rah. And in Israel, they're all like, Netanyahu, this government, et cetera, et cetera.
They're very critical now.
It's weird. And you're like, wait, I don't understand. You're in the middle of this terror, because they understand the actions that have led to these kinds of moments. They know that this isn't just in a vacuum. They have the ability to condemn the horror of this terrorism, but also to say there are very clear-cut policies and actions that we have pursued that has brought us to this place.
This is you're saying
people have done this.
This is the Israelis. There are a lot of Israelis. That's right. They're very self-critical.
But like we can't in America.
Well, I would say this though, and I would love you to speak to this. Sometimes you have to look at the results. So rather than get into the details of Scripture, or even the details of how we got to October 7th, which I try, and then what to do from that. Boy, good luck with that. That we could be here all day and we'd get nowhere.
There's no answer.
But some people have to come up with an answer, and it's the Israelis. They've got to figure something out. But and probably the Palestinians as well. But I see if you can speak to this. It's one thing to say, yes, judging, the Quran to the New Testament, the Quran to the Old Testament. We can piecemeal these things, and it's a question of where you look. Do you want to look at the loving, the scriptures that promote love, or the scriptures that promote war? And we can go through that. I do think it's significant. I do think it's a legitimate question to ask. Why is it that countries that are Christian, or at least started out that way, seem to be doing much better? These liberal democracies have led to liberal democracies, have done better in terms of, for their own citizens, things like women's rights and the rights of the marginalized and even a standard of living, even artistic expression.
Just out of curiosity, can you give me an example of one of those countries?
I would say the United States, Britain, I'd say France, I'd say Germany. In terms of
the four richest countries in the world.
Well, I'm saying let's just take Spain, let's take Italy, let's just take their artistic expression, their sort of ingenuity. The things that they make, so great cars, whatever it might be, the things, their creative expression, let's just take that. The things that the cornerstones to culture, right, seem to flourish in societies that, first of all, probably hold the separation of church and state as one ideal, the idea of freedom of expression, freedom of speech, all these things that we take for granted in the West. Probably things that were kind of canonized in the Constitution.
Yeah.
That's my religion. I think that they solved the political problem in a lot of ways. We have a lot of problems in the West. But you have to admit that it seems that countries that have Islam as their official state or religion have a great deal of trouble separating church and state, have a great deal of trouble separating the tenets of Islam with everyday life. Yeah. That seems to do two things. One, it seems to keep them from maybe being as developed in many ways, culturally, from an innovative standpoint, et cetera, in the world. They don't compete as well. They tend to be one-crop economies like Saudi Arabia and places like that who have just oil. They tend to be monarchies. And you don't see that in the liberal democracies. To what degree does Christianity and Islam play a factor in that discrepancy?
So let's start with that larger framework that we began with, which is you define yourself in opposition to another. That's what you just did. You just defined what it means to be American by finding things that go against that. And when you did that, you completely misunderstood what it means to be an American. So let me explain. let me put it all together for a minute here. First and foremost, I think what the 20th century has taught us is that the key to national success is a dedication to popular sovereignty, whatever that means. And that could be, the party system that we have here, a constitutional system.
Democracy, individual rights.
Democracy, is a part of that. Yeah, but popular sovereignty, that the will of the people defines the character of the government.
Got it.
Right? So some sort of popular sovereignty with access to the free market economy. I would say that if I were to boil down the lesson of the last 120, 30 years, how do you get to national success? That's the key. You put those two things together and you have an opportunity for national success. This idea that religion plays any role in either of those things is fundamentally flawed for a couple of reasons. One more time, let's just go back here. You want to blame Christianity for violence in Christians' name? In Christianity's name, you want to blame Islam for violence in religious name? This is the fight that I would have with Hitchens all the time. Then great. Then you need to blame nationalism for fascism. Then you need to blame communism for socialism. So
those are religions.
That's great. If you want, again, just be consistent.
So atheism in many ways is a religion, isn't it?
Blame atheism for Maoism.
Yeah.
I mean, Mao slaughtered hundreds of thousands of priests, monks, religious people, not because they were enemies of the state, but because they were religious, right? So we should blame atheism for that then. Again, obviously I don't believe this, but my only request is, like, if that's where you are, then just be consistent and blame all of these ideologies.
How do you? So how do you?
I still want to ask you a question, though. I want to answer your question. Okay, so there's that. So before we lionize these countries, let's figure out the socioeconomic factors involved in their success. France, Italy, Germany, Spain. These are countries in which religion don't mean shit. Christianity doesn't mean shit in these countries anymore. Yeah. Okay. On the flip side of that, there have been more female Muslim heads of state just in the last 30 years than there have been female representatives in American Congress in the last, I think, 20 years or something like that. Senators in Congress. So again, does that mean to say that Islam by definition is better for women than Christianity is? No, it just means it's f***ing irrelevant. It's not a factor to, the role of women in political society. Now, people always say, okay, but what about Saudi Arabia and what about Iran? Yeah. Those are countries in which women are violently oppressed. And that is bullshit, and it has to stop. And unfortunately, at least in the case of Saudi Arabia, we support that. We support it wholeheartedly with our national security and economic policies. But again, to say, wait, so I'm going to judge Islam by Saudi Arabia. Great. Then let's judge Christianity by Eritrea. Eritrea is a Christian nation.
Borders Ethiopia for you guys.
Which is also a Christian nation.
Yes, Coptic Christian. They think the original Ark of the Covenant is there.
I believe Eritrea, don't quote me on this, is like 96% Christian or something crazy.
A terrible civil war between Ethiopia
is like 95% Christian.
The oldest Coptic church, I think, the oldest church, I think, is in Ethiopia, isn't it? Yeah.
So, okay, from now on, let's judge Christianity's role in the state based on Eritrea and not based on the United States. Okay, if we're going to base, Islam's role in the state based on Iran and Saudi Arabia, again, this is not. I'm not doing whataboutism, because that's not my goal. Like I'm not like, oh, that sucks. Well, this sucks too. That's not my point. All I'm trying to get people to do is say, how am I talking and thinking about these things? Because there is a perspective in which I say, well, this scripture is worse than this scripture because this one says love and this one says hate, because those are the only two verses that I'm going to use. Or this country, which is mostly Muslim, is shit, and this country, which is mostly Christian, is pretty great. And so therefore that says something about Islam and Christianity. Again, all you are doing is defining yourself. Let's go to this church and state thing, because this one comes up all the time.